Charlie jumped from 5,000 meters, delaying the parachute launch until 200 meters. He absorbed the impact with his aura and landed safely on a hill east of the opposition headquarters. Taking advantage of the fog and lightning, he infiltrated the hostage village of Melba. From 2 soldiers, he learned that 8 hostages were being held in the basement of Ansala's house, guarded by 16 men. Charlie incapacitated one, controlled Faisal with suggestion, and then disguised himself in the village while planning the evacuation. Enjoy the increasingly exciting storyline. Thank you.
Chapter 2654. However, at this time everyone, including the soldiers on the eastern mountaintop, focused their attention on the west, so no one noticed the passing of this figure. And this figure is Charlie, who jumped down from an altitude of more than 5,000 meters. At this time, Charlie's descending speed was extremely fast, and his descending speed exceeded 50 meters in 1 second. Vasily on the plane stared at the data uploaded by the computer and said palely, "Mr. Wade's descending speed is too fast, and his remaining ground height is less than 300 meters. This is far below the minimum limit for the safe opening of the umbrella." When Chester heard this, his whole body trembled in shock, and he blurted out, "Let the young master open the umbrella." Vasily recovered, and blurted out, "Mr. Wade, open the umbrella. Open the umbrella." While speaking, Charlie had already skimmed over the top of the mountain at high speed and fell towards the mountainside. He was not in a hurry to open the umbrella, because he knew that when he didn't open the umbrella, the goal was so small that it was difficult to see clearly. But once the parachute is opened, a huge parachute will be released in an instant. In that case, the target will be magnified 10 times or even dozens of times. Therefore, he must make sure that the time for opening the umbrella is as short as possible. In other words, he hopes to open the parachute at the lowest altitude, and then use the fastest time to reduce the speed of his fall to a height that is safe enough for him, and then finish the landing quickly, and then parachute immediately after landing, put it away so that he can avoid detection to the greatest extent. Seeing that there were only 200 meters left from the ground, Vasily realized that Charlie was still descending rapidly, and realized that he had not opened the umbrella, and couldn't help but blurt out, "It's over, this height must be certain. His body will be broken to pieces." Chester was frightened by his words. He had already prepared to inform the old man to prepare for the ransom and save Charlie back, but he never expected that Charlie would fall to death because of parachuting. If this is really a fall, he will definitely be to blame. Just when the two of them were panicking, Charlie suddenly opened the parachute. The huge parachute was released from the umbrella bag at once, causing Charlie's rapidly falling body to be yanked back by a strong force. Suddenly opening the umbrella at such a fast speed slows down. Even if the average person does not faint, at least they will break a few ribs because of the huge inertia. But Charlie filled the bones of his whole body with spiritual energy. His shoulders suddenly exerted force, abruptly holding the huge reaction force. Immediately afterward, his descent speed from more than 50 meters per second, in a very short period of time, reduced to about 20 meters per second. However, this speed is far from the safe speed for skydiving. Normal people parachuting, the descending speed when landing is lower than 6 meters per second. But at this time, Charlie was still less than 50 meters away from the ground. Falling at this speed is almost the same as falling. Fortunately, in the remaining 50 meters, the descending speed is still decreasing due to the effect of the parachute. Immediately afterward, Charlie gathered all his true energy into his legs, and his whole person slammed into the ground at a speed of more than 10 meters per second. Vasily on the plane did not dare to look at the data returned on the computer, because he knew very well that after a second or two, Charlie's heart rate would drop rapidly until it falls to 0. However, he never dreamed that when Charlie had completely stopped falling, his heart rate would only be faster than just a dozen times per second. He looked incredulous, and blurted out, "Mr. Wade, are you still alive?" At this time, Charlie had already begun to quickly put away the parachute. While he stuffed all the parachutes into the parachute bag, he said lightly, "Don't worry, I have landed safely." Hearing Charlie's reply, several people in the cabin were shocked to speak. Vasily's views of the whole person have been completely subverted, and he subconsciously said, how is this possible?" Although Chester breathed a sigh of relief, he was equally shocked and said, "Vasily, could it be you who miscalculated the information?" Impossible. Vasily said confidently, I have been skydiving for so many years, and I have never made a mistake in the calculation of the data. Chester frowned, then I really can't figure it out. At this time, Isaac, who had not spoken, said, Don't worry, the true strength of the young master is much stronger than you think. We will go back with peace of mind and prepare to meet the young master at the predetermined place. Immediately, the transport plane made a large circle in the air and began to return to Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. But Charlie concealed his figure and breath all the way, in the fastest time, all the way from the middle of the mountain to the foot of the mountain. Because of the thicker rain clouds, the lighting conditions are getting worse. Although it is only in the afternoon, the visibility is almost the same as after the sunset. Such lighting conditions further reduced Charlie's chances of being discovered. Coupled with the thunder blast that killed several soldiers, all the opposition soldiers were a little restless, so the vigilance around them was naturally greatly reduced. At this time, the village where the reactionaries were stationed was no more than a step away from Charlie. He could even see the densely arranged bullet holes on the low walls of the village where the yellow soil was piled up. Since the entire village is located in a narrow valley, the buildings of the village are divided into crescent-shaped sections. The outermost buildings are almost surrounded by a wall of nearly 2 meters high. The village only leaves one south and 2 entrances to the north. At the entrance and exit of the village, there is a Middle Eastern-style stone arch, guarded by soldiers on both sides. Outside the village, many soldiers carrying guns and live ammunition walked back and forth along the wall, and on the roofs of many earthen buildings in the village, there were many sentries carrying AK-47s. However, Charlie could see that the soldiers patrolling and standing guard were relatively loose as a whole, and most of them just paced back and forth with their guns in hand and were perfunctory. In fact, this group of opposition forces, although their individual combat strength is average and their weapons and equipment are not advanced, but their combat experience is very sufficient. The more combat experience you have, the easier it is to make empirical mistakes. They have gone through all kinds of wars, including encirclement and suppression, encounters on narrow roads, and decisive battles, but they have never experienced individual infiltration. Regardless of whether it is the government, the opposition, or the Kurdish armed forces, the biggest drawback is that the combat effectiveness of individual soldiers is not good, and the energy of one person is really limited, so everyone is operating in groups, no matter how bad it is. There are 7 or 8 people and 2 or 3 heavy machine guns in the pickup truck, no one has a pit in his head and a person goes deep into the enemy's nest alone. Precisely. Because they had never experienced such a thing, when they were defending, they did not regard individual penetration as a defensive focus. Their energy is used to monitor whether the government has sent large-scale motorized troops, whether it has sent warplanes, whether it has deployed heavy artillery at long distances in advance, and they are not so concerned about the situation other than these. Charlie found the patrol team's gap and quietly touched outside the fence in a very short time. The point he chose was relatively lax, and it belonged to the blind spot of the sentries on both sides of the building and was the best breakthrough point. Charlie, who was as light as a swallow, jumped outside the wall, and the person directly climbed over the wall and landed on the inside very quietly. At this moment he was in a small courtyard. There were only 3 earthen houses in this small courtyard, which looked very dilapidated. Charlie used his aura to perceive the surroundings and found that there was no sign of anyone in these 3 earthen houses, so he prepared to follow. Starting from this yard, it moved little by little to the central square of the village. When he was parachuting, he saw the opposition park 4 helicopters in the central square. This shows that the opposition regards the central square as the most defensive place. Since the expensive helicopters are parked here, Charlie believes 8 hostages, including Melba, should also be detained near the central square. He passed through the deserted small courtyard just now, and when he was about to cross another small courtyard, footsteps sounded not far away, so he immediately took a step back and hid in the wall of the abandoned small courtyard again. Immediately afterwards, 2 middle-aged soldiers wearing desert camouflage uniforms walked over while holding a gun while talking. What surprised Charlie was that what they spoke was not Arabic, but English. What Charlie didn't know was that English is also the lingua franca of Syria. Although the teaching level and per capita education level here are very low, in recent years, it has been occupied by Europe and the United States, so English has become their second mother tongue. These opposition soldiers also received secret funding from Europe and the United States in the early years, and even Europe and the United States sent professional coaches to them to help them improve their combat effectiveness. At that time, the coaches from Europe and the United States almost all spoke English, and the textbooks were also practical English. So over time, the English level of Syrian soldiers and opposition soldiers has been greatly improved. It is not a big deal to speak English. At this time, one of them said to the other, Zishan said on the walkie-talkie that 5 people were killed by lightning on the mountain, 3 were injured, and 2 of the 3 were injured or in a dangerous situation and medical attention is very urgent. The commander was asked to send a helicopter to the rescue, but he did not agree. The other person shrugged, spread his hands helplessly, and said, the commander is impossible to agree. We are currently in short supply of aviation kerosene. The remaining stock cannot satisfy the 4 helicopters for several takeoffs and landings. If you want to save everything to deal with emergencies, how can you waste 1 takeoff and landing for the 2 wounded? As he said with emotion, there is not much diesel left. Fortunately, the government has not started to organize an offensive, otherwise our helicopters and tanks will be able to support 1 day at most. The person before could not help complaining. The world's oil is in the Middle East, but we are short of oil to this point. It's really ridiculous. Another person laughed and said, we only have high crude oil production, but the refining strength is really too bad. This time the commander wants to knock a sum of money from the Americans and then introduce a set of refining equipment. In that case, we will have our own fuel supply in the future. The man sighed, I just don't know if Yankees are willing to give money or not. Among the 8 people, it seems that there are no particularly good family conditions. If you can't get a penny back, it will be troublesome. The other person said disdainfully, what's the problem? Just kill them all. Having said that, he deliberately lowered his voice and said, the commander said, if the Americans don't pay today, they will just kill the 8 Yankees. During the process, they will record the video and send it to mainstream media all over the world. Let the Americans face down. The person could not help but rub his hands and said, hey. I like that blonde woman. I haven't tried the taste of a Western woman yet. I don't know if I have this opportunity to experience it. I haven't touched a woman for 3 months. I miss it. The other man gave a lewd smile, nodded and said, I like the black-haired Oriental woman better. There is an illusory Oriental mystery. The man said with a smile before, let's go over and take a look later. If we have a chance, we will move the guards away, and then take the 2 women to another room. Let's talk about the addiction first. Okay. Let's go and see, maybe there will be a chance. Anyway, they will be executed soon. Instead of this, let us take care of them before they die. The 2 while speaking, laughing together. At this moment, a pair of big hands suddenly grabbed the necks of the 2 of them from behind, making them not only unable to move, but also unable to make any sound. At this time, the owner of the big hands said in English, if you don't want to die, just throw away the snatch. It was Charlie who spoke. When the 2 opposition soldiers were talking just now, they were completely defenseless deep down. After all, this is their base area. Not only are they heavily guarded all around, but even the people here also are their supporters. Therefore, in their subconsciousness, as long as the outside is not fighting, the inside is absolutely safe. But just in this, absolutely safe, environment, suddenly an unknown person appeared. This moment made the 2 of them extremely nervous. Because they are not responsible for guarding, neither of their guns are ready, which means that if they want to use a gun to deal with the enemy behind them, they must load the gun and deactivate the safety pin so that they can pull the trigger. However, this process takes a few seconds at the fastest. And the hand of the other person pinching the neck of the 2 people is surprisingly strong and swift. It is like a hydraulic clamp at the same time, so that both of them are firmly convinced that once the other party has any dissatisfaction, it is very likely to directly pinch their necks. Therefore, both of them cooperated very well and threw their guns on the ground, and then raised their hands. One of them said nervously, hey friend, if you have something to say, don't be impulsive. Charlie said coldly, you 2 turn around. After Charlie finished speaking, the clamp of the 2 people's necks in his hand was slightly loosened. The 2 dared not delay and quickly turned around. When they saw Charlie, they seemed to have seen a ghost. They originally thought that the evil star that appeared suddenly must be an American. There are two reasons for thinking so. The first reason is that they captured 8 young people from the United States in their battle against the government this time. And they took these 8 people as hostages and demanded a huge ransom from the United States, so the United States sending people to rescue them. It makes sense. The second reason is that they also know that the individual combat effectiveness of the government army is really not bad compared to them. If it is a government soldier, it is impossible to sneak among them silently, only in the United States. Schwarzenegger and Stallone have this ability. However, what made them dream of was that the evil star in front of them turned out to be a yellow man with an East Asian face. One of them asked nervously, Hey friend, who are you? What do you want? Charlie said coldly, You are not qualified to ask me questions. In the current situation, I can only ask, you only answer, and answer honestly. Whoever does not answer well, I will kill him. Do you understand? The two hurriedly nodded their heads. Understood. If you have any questions, just ask. Charlie asked, Where are the young Americans you arrested now being held? One of them hurriedly said, The 8 people are imprisoned in the cellar of Ansala's house. Another hurriedly added, Ansala's home is in the middle of the village, close to the square. Charlie asked again, How are the 8 of them now? Are they all alive? One nodded and blurted, They are all alive now, but they will choose one person to be executed soon. The U.S. Embassy is unwilling to give money until now. Our commander decided to execute one person first, putting a little pressure on the other party. Charlie continued to ask, How many entrances and exits are there and how many guards are there? The man opened his mouth and said, There is only one entrance to the cellar. There are 4 guards inside, and there are about a dozen guards outside. These guards usually live in Ansala's house. Charlie asked him, Then if I want to go in, do you have any way to take me in? The man hesitated for a moment and said, To be honest, your face, others will know that it is a foreigner at first glance, and there is nothing I can do. Take you in. Charlie pointed to the soldier next to him and asked him, If I change into his clothes, can you take me? The man hesitated and said, If you put on his clothes and put on a mask, you should be able to enter the yard, but once you get down to the cellar, the guards in the cellar will definitely ask you who you are and where you are coming from. This is because our commander has clearly ordered that these 8 people must be watched strictly. So, even if you go in, it is inevitable to be exposed. As he said, he hurriedly added, Moreover, if you act on them, it is likely to alarm the guards outside. There is only a narrow staircase in and out of the cellar. Once they find out, you can't escape at all. As long as they throw a grenade in your face, none of the people in it will survive. Charlie said calmly, You don't need to worry about it, you just need to take me in. The man nodded and said nervously, I can take you in, but I still have to remind you, if you are a little careless, I will tell you, there are also 8 people who might die inside. Charlie smiled slightly, If you don't cooperate with me, you might die inside as well. The man quickly said, I will cooperate. I will definitely cooperate. Okay. Charlie nodded slightly in satisfaction, then looked at the other person, and said coldly, Take off your coat. The man hurriedly said, You pinch me like this, I can't take it off. Charlie smiled. Okay, then I just let go of you. After that, he let go of his hand directly. The person was overjoyed and pretended to take off his shirt, but the clever soldier quietly looked at Charlie, and his mind was also running fast. He found that Charlie turned out to be bare-handed. Not only did he have no weapons in his hands, but he could not even see that he was carrying a weapon around his waist. So he thought to himself, if I listen to him and take off my clothes to him, then he will probably kill me now, but if I find a chance to escape now, he may not have time to chase me. What's more, he still has my companion in his hand, which makes it more difficult for him to be cloned. Plus he has no weapons, it is impossible to kill me from a distance. Even if he really has a gun, and he takes out a gun and shoots me, there is a certain probability that he will not reach me. Even if he hits me, I have a certain probability that I won't die. And as long as he shoots, everyone will focus, and he will not be able to escape by then. Because of this, I think he is less likely to shoot. If you look at it this way, it's more cost-effective to run away anyway. Thinking of this, he immediately made up his mind to take the opportunity to escape. So, he took off his coat, pretending to hand it to Charlie, and then suddenly threw his coat onto Charlie's face, turned, and ran back. However, just as he was about to run, he suddenly discovered that his feet seemed to be firmly sucked by the ground, and he couldn't lift a bit at all. At this moment, he thought he had met the devil, and his whole person looked at Charlie dumbfounded, his eyes full of horror and despair. Charlie smiled slightly and said with an apologetic look, "I'm sorry, I just blocked your nerve center with aura, you can't move anywhere below your neck now." When these words came out, not only the immobile soldier but even the guy who was grasped by Charlie was frightened. They don't understand what aura is, but this thing can make a living person suddenly unable to move. This ability is far beyond their normal cognition. Charlie looked at the horrified expression of the guy in front of him, sneered, and said, "Oh my friend, I really wanted to save your life, but you really don't know how to accept it. Turning your face will overthrow our friendship. If that's the case, don't blame me for being merciless." After hearing what Charlie said, the man hurriedly blurted out and pleaded, Friend, I didn't mean it. I was confused just now, please give me another chance." Charlie shook his head. "Sorry, there is only one chance. If you have another life, remember that you must not betray someone who treats you as a friend." The man turned pale with fright, and he opened his mouth and called for help in order to have another last fight. At this time, he regarded calling for help as his last chance. If he can attract other people's attention, he may still survive. Step back 10,000 steps and say, even if you can't live, at least it will cause some trouble for the Oriental man in front of him. Once his whereabouts are leaked, there is a high probability that he will not be able to leave this alive. So he blurted out immediately, "Help." However, when he opened his mouth to shout out the content of the call for help, he was shocked to find that the volume of his voice seemed to be restricted by some strange force so that the call for help just now was almost inaudible. He looked at Charlie in horror, and tremblingly asked, Are you a human or a ghost?" Charlie smiled indifferently and said, "This question is not important to you anymore, because you will immediately become a lonely ghost." After speaking, Charlie hurriedly changed his words again. "Don't mean it, I have missed the word. I am not going to make you a lonely ghost, it is better to make you a living dead." After that, he stretched out his finger and tapped lightly on the opponent's forehead. He immediately lost all consciousness and fell to the ground, his eyes widened, and staring. Just now when Charlie tapped his forehead lightly, a trace of spiritual energy completely destroyed his brain, making the person totally brain-dead in an instant. At this time, the person pinched by Charlie was so scared that he almost passed out. He had never seen a god like Charlie in his entire life, with incredible strength. One sentence can make his companion immobile, and one tap can kill instantly. This kind of person is simply scarier than the devil. Seeing him frightened, Charlie said, "You don't have to be so scared, as long as you can honestly cooperate with me, then I will save your life. I will do what I say." The man said in a panic, I must be honest, I really will cooperate with you." Seeing that he was already stuttering, Charlie looked down at his legs and found that his legs were violently swinging at this time, and the whole person was clearly shocked. This makes him a little big head. Because, if this guy is so alarmed, even if he can take him to the place where Melbawat is detained, he will be seen by others as abnormal. Thinking of this, Charlie sighed helplessly, and said, "Since your mental quality is so bad, then I will give you a psychological hint." After speaking, he immediately tapped on the opponent's forehead and said, "From now on, your only task is to do everything I command you to do with all your strength. Do you understand?" At this moment, the other person's eyes were a little dull for a moment, and it took more than 10 seconds to return to normal, and he respectfully said to Charlie, "I understand." At this time, he has completely lost the panic he had just now, he no longer stammers, his legs no longer tremble. Chapter 2660. Charlie then relaxed, pointing at the person lying on the ground, and said, "Take off his pants and then set him up. Just make sure that no one will find him tonight." "Okay." The other party responded and immediately stepped forward to take off the man's pants, then carried him up and hid him in a dilapidated house in an abandoned courtyard next to him. Charlie put on the clothes and trousers of that person directly, and the person he has changed with the psychological hints also ran back and respectfully said, "The arrangements have been made according to your instructions." Charlie nodded and asked him, "What is your name?" The man hurriedly said, "My name is Faisal." Charlie asked him, "Faisal, do you have a mask?" Faisal hurriedly took out a black mask in a plastic bag from his pocket, and said, "This one was sent out 2 days ago and has not been used yet." Charlie nodded, then took it and opened it. It was the kind of headgear that completely covered his head. Not only did it wrap the head, but it also covered most of the face, and only opened a slit in the eye. Charlie asked Faisal, "If I wear this, will it look a bit too different?" "No," Faisal said confidently. "In fact, many people are used to wearing headgear. On the one hand, it is to prevent faces from being remembered by outsiders, and on the other hand to protect oneself wind and sand. There is also another reason. It is the commander who is afraid of being decapitated by the opponent, so he requires some people to wear headgear as long as they go out. This is the same for him. This can effectively interfere with the opponent's judgment." Charlie was relieved. After putting the headgear on his head, he said, "Okay, you can take me over now." Faisal nodded without hesitation, then bent down to pick up the 2 AK-47s, and handed one of them to Charlie, saying, "Please put the gun on your back." Charlie didn't worry that he would resist with a gun. After he took the AK-47, he hung it on his body in a manner and then walked towards the center of the village with Faisal. Along the way, he encountered many soldiers who were just strolling or patrolling on purpose. Some people recognized Faisal and greeted him. Although Faisal was a little slow, he was still normal overall, so no one was suspecting him. As for Charlie wearing headgear, he didn't say a word, and no one took the initiative to greet him, because when a person wears headgear, only people who know him well can recognize who he is. None of these people knew who he was, and none of them could match him with his acquaintances. In fact, this is the safest, because their army seems to have near 2,000 people, and no one is really familiar with everyone, so they can't recognize Charlie, and will only classify Charlie as unfamiliar. Among those comrades in arms, there was no doubt that Charlie would be an invader from outside. All the way to the square in the center of the village, Charlie found that many soldiers were nervously busy in front of the 4 helicopters, so Charlie asked Faisal in a low voice, "What are those people doing?" Faisal hurriedly replied, "They are all members of the helicopter brigade, most of them are maintenance personnel. The weather today is gloomy and visibility is poor. Our visual observations will be restricted a lot, so we will send helicopters to patrol in turn. Monitor whether there are government forces approaching us quietly." Charlie nodded, remembering something, and asked him, "By the way, can you fly a helicopter?" Faisal shook his head and said, "I can't. I'm from an armored brigade. I can drive tanks and infantry vehicles." Charlie nodded. As to how to take himself away after saving Melba, he still has no clear plan. It would be nice to save Melba alone. Even if he carried her and escaped quietly, walking dozens of kilometers along the mountain road to meet his people and the others was nothing. However, if he wants to save her and her 7 other friends at the same time, it will be tricky on its own. Thinking of this, he put the question behind his head again, and said to himself, "It's not the time to think about this, so let's talk about it when I meet them."